Hi folks! So today we are at Wysmykal Farms and we are going to talk to the owners here about how they have changed their nutrient management from a 100% pre-plant application to a split application of nitrogen throughout the growing season. They've also been demonstrating some cover crop work here in these protected spaces as well, so we're going to take a look at what they've been doing. Let's check it out.
My name is Jessy Wysmyk. I have a Wysmykal Farm with my partner Charles. We started the farm 13 years ago, and we're an organic mixed vegetable farm. We grow lots of different vegetables and herbs, but not potatoes or sweet potatoes. And we right at the beginning, we put up our first little unheated wooden greenhouse 13 years ago, and we've been adding more ever since. I think we have enough now. This is the second.
Okay.
The second greenhouse. The original greenhouse is no longer, unfortunately. And we had no protected culture experience prior to our own.
Why don't we start off by talking a little bit about your nutrient management in the tunnels? Sort of what did it start out looking like and where are you now?
For a long time, we were, I think, applying 100% or kind of 100% of our nutrients at the pre-plant time. We were using crab meal and seafood compost. But what happened after doing that for many years is that our pH got really high. We had excessive amounts of everything, especially calcium from all those claws. We were seeing uneven ripening and signs of nutrient deficiencies, and we were trying to supplement potassium and magnesium. We weren't really able to turn it around. This year we applied, we've stopped using seafood compost and crab meal in the greenhouses. We applied 50% of our fertility requirements at pre-plant. We grow tomatoes in here. We used alfalfa pellets and potassium sulfate. And then we applied, the remaining 50% over a period of probably 6 weeks. We were going to have a dosatron and apply small amounts more frequently, but our dosatron broke, and we weren't able to repair it this year, so we just used watering cans every 2 weeks.
How did your crop respond to split applications compared to that 100% pre-plant?
We still had kind of signs of nutrient deficiency in our crops, or in the tomatoes. Mostly just you can see the plants, have some issues on their margins and then uneven ripening in the fruit. We ended up planting probably half of the greenhouse with determinate tomatoes and the other half with indeterminate tomatoes. And we found that the indeterminate tomatoes kind of turned around after a while, and the fruit started to look better and the plants started to look healthier. But at that point we had a lot of botrytis in the greenhouse. So we didn't end up with as much marketable fruit as we might have liked.
How did you go about sort of coming up with how much you needed to amend the soil with, and did you do any testing throughout the season?
We did. We usually complete a soil test in the fall, and that helps us to determine what we need to apply in the spring. And we were taking tissue samples and having those analyzed every 2 weeks to try to gauge how our how the plants were doing. But a limitation of that was that we had these different zones in the greenhouse where like some looked great, others had a nitrogen deficiency, others weren't able to access potassium, and so we were able to see kind of the problems in the plants before the tissue test results showed us what was going on. And I think ideally we would have sent probably 5 or 6 different tests every 2 weeks, but that would have been expensive and a lot of work. And also trying to kind of change the rate that we were amending the soil for those different zones would have been a lot.
We're talking a little bit about soil testing. How regularly do you do that in here?
We try to test the greenhouse soil on an annual basis. The field soil is more like every couple of years in different parts of the farm.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what we've got going on behind you here?
Yeah, so we've been, this is our second year participating in a protected space cover crop trial with perennia and OFCAF. And on this side is a perennia suggested mix with oats, tillage radish, and beets. Although the beets, they don't, both last year and this year, they don't really seem to do very well. On that side is a mix that was suggested by Judson Reed at Cornell, and it has red clover, triticale, tillage radish, and field peas. This side was seeded in early September, and this side was seeded later in September.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the preparation, I guess, so transition from the tomato crop to getting the cover crop sort of seeded and established?
Well, we removed the tomatoes, I think mostly by leaving the roots in, just lopping them at the bottom, and then we had some plastic mulch in here which we removed. We took up the drip tape. We worked the soil a little bit with a Planet Junior, and then we seeded the cover crops with an earthway seeder, which is a lot of walking back and forth. Yeah, but it works. And then we watered them while they got established, and we kind of, in September and October, we just kept an eye on the soil moisture and watered kind of as needed.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so there's no additional sort of fertility needs of a cover crop. You just put it in, add some water, and she's good to go.
We will add row cover when it gets to be colder, like when we're having, hard frosts. We've had kind of a long fall with relatively mild temperatures so far. Last year we row covered the greenhouses with the cover crops, and there was a visible difference between the crops growing under the row cover and those that didn't make it under the row cover. There was just a higher survival rate and better growth, and we looked better. I mean, we had a relatively mild winter last year, aside from that cold snap. So we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why don't you talk then a little bit about the other end of the cover crop, where you're then terminating it and sort of getting your cash crops in for the year?
So we mow it with a lawnmower, and then we incorporate it. We've used a wheel hoe, which is a lot of work, and just a little walk behind tiller, or this thing, Planet Junior. We found there's still there's quite a bit of residue. Usually we terminate it and then we want to plant right away. So it's best to use transplants. And I think we'd have to wait if we wanted to direct seed. In the other greenhouse where we had a good cover crop last year, our spring crops, like our lettuces and spinach and stuff like that, there was some variability in them.
Okay. Yeah.
But then the cherry tomatoes that we, there was still kind of like big chunks of cover crop in there when we planted those things. The cherry tomatoes that followed those spring crops did really well.
Yeah.
It was mostly to address the nutrient problems and to try to get away from the compost use, which we can't really use anymore.
Yeah.
So
why don't you talk a little bit about the seeding date demonstration that you guys hosted last year?
Okay, so we had 4 different seeding dates. We were only using this mix last year, the perennial mix. And beginning, I think, the first week of September into the first week of October every week. Perhaps not surprising is that the crops that we seeded earlier, like in early September, grew much bigger and better than the ones that we seeded later. Late September, early October is too late. I think if you want to get something in early, like we want to plant our tomatoes in early April, and so we need to get that growth in the fall. In the other greenhouse, we seeded probably later September, and it was smaller going into the winter, but we had more time before the next crop, so there was more growth in the spring, and that worked out also. We also had a watering issue last year that might have kind of been a confounding factor in our maybe we had to water with watering cans. We had our main water disconnected, which was very time intensive, and you can't really do a proper job with watering cans. So maybe by the time we got to that 4th week, we weren't as enthusiastic about watering.
Super fair.
Yeah.
And so this year behind you, it looks like you've got some sprinklers set up.
Yeah, we had our water back this year, and we really wanted to see good establishment in our cover crops, so we watered them when they were getting established and as needed when it was still warm enough to leave our water on. We've since kind of drained our field irrigation. So
Yeah. And just for some context here, I'll just say that this is a pretty good setup here, where you've got the sprinklers in and you've removed all of the drip tape, where we're looking to mow and incorporate these crops in the spring. Obviously, having this in-soil drip tape is going to be problematic, so this is awesome. All right, and just before we finish up here, have you done cover cropping before you started adding them in the tunnels here, or is this sort of your first go at it?
Yeah, no, we've always been into cover crops. So we've always done cover cropping outdoors. We've been trying to do more of that also recently.
Awesome.
These last year and this year are our first 2 years trying it in the greenhouses.
And so what's the final verdict if you have to compare cover cropping indoors compared to cover cropping outdoors?
Well, you have a little more flexibility with your seeding date indoors. Like, you can get away with planting later than you can outdoors. Quite a bit. Yeah, which is nice because you generally want to keep those. Yeah, if your kind of summer cash crops are doing well, you want to keep them going for as long as possible, and that's kind of a challenge with cover cropping as well. Just having to take out crops that might still be producing well, and to plant cover crops for the next year.
Absolutely. Do you find that seeding or terminating is more difficult in here, or is it comparable to what you do outside?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a little more labor intensive because we're using smaller scale tools.
Yeah.
We have a broadcast, like just a little broadcast seeder for outdoor cover crop plantings, and then we can go behind with a tractor and a spike harrow or a chain harrow, and that works well enough. But we can't do that in here, so we use the earthway to kind of ensure that everything was planted at a suitable depth, and that was just a lot of walking. Nothing wrong with walking, but it takes time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. No, that's great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us here today. I think this is a great showcase of the movement of cover crops to protected spaces. So looking at things like seeding date, seeding rate, looking at different mixes, how can we use row cover to best promote the growth of these cover crops, best strategies for keeping the crop watered, all that good stuff. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.